to be more involved with ideas. So problem solving is a skill that we're always developing and really always working through as developers. We're looking for ways to, we're looking at what the world ultimately is lacking and how we can impact that. That is what we are looking for. And so we should always be looking for that skill to promote, right? So being present, paying attention to others' perspective, looking for things that other people complain about is another thing that I really think that I see as a way to find new ideas. Where are people finding struggles? What needs to be brought up? These are the places where I kind of think of them. But not all ideas are going to be revolutionary. It can be as simple as, oh, I found this cool API, and maybe I want to execute something with that API. I'm working with something on movies. It is not the coolest API, but it is an API that I really enjoy working with. So it can be really simple and really bare bones of where ideas for apps come from. Most ideas will stay in your notes. This is just the way that it works, and that's okay. Ideas aren't going to be revolutionary every time, but they're going to be worth at least writing down and maybe going back to with some time. So keeping track, how do we do that? So pen and paper is the most simple thing. This is like bare bones, like where do we start? I keep one in my pack at all times. I keep them by my nightstand. It's astounding how many little notebooks that I have of just like pen and paper just everywhere. Post-it notes are another great way. I have them a huge stack by my desk and hang them by my monitor all the time. Software, and we're going to get more into software of how to really track these ideas and a little light about how to use them. Because our end goal at the end of all of this is, to me, I think about it as, I really want as little time in between the idea of when the thought is actually, it comes into my brain and writing it down. Because I think there's something in that moment. When you're in practice, you're able to capture something. And you're going to need these notes because who knows when you're going to be able to execute such an idea. So you're really going to need some time to really think through. And I think there's something to mentioning that. So the apps. So Evernote. Evernote is a ubiquitous app. If you have not used it, it is everywhere. You can use it on iOS app, or iOS, web, Mac, Windows, it's everywhere. The really nice thing about it is it's simple notes. If you know how to use Google Docs, if you know how to use Word, you know how to use this. So it's already something you're probably familiar with if you have not used it. But I think there's a better program called Drafts. Drafts is a really great program. It's in the iOS system. They have complications and everything for your watch. It's Evernote, but with more options. You get a lot more to play with. It's really nice. So Evernote. This is kind of what Evernote looks like. This is my ideas. So like creating a new note, you can see it kind of takes a little bit of time. It takes a few clicks. I think it could be better. So app idea, you always get the Instagram for X. This is always, people give you this idea. So Evernote. So it's a unified system. It's really nice because of the web app. You can just use it everywhere. So whatever you can use a web browser for, it works. It's as simple as they come. It's a good place to start just because it's just so approachable. I think it's so easy. But I think there are better ways, and we're going to go through that as Drafts. So Drafts, you just launch your window, and boom, you're into a new note. It's instant. You don't have to think about anything. It's just there. You just launch it, and same thing on the phone. All right. So what they call is instant capture note taking. So once you launch it, it is up, it is ready to go. You are taking your notes right then and there. You get access to Markdown in this, so you can really customize the way that things are looking. I really enjoy using it to make like readmes for my GitHubs and stuff like that. It's really great. You can get preview windows, and there's a lot of what they call customizable actions. And these actions are basically add-ons to your note so that you can make really easy lists. You can do a lot of really interesting stuff because it's a very plain looking file. You get offline usage with this. So if you're out and you have your phone only or your watch, you can just, boom, you can just hit it and make a new note, and it'll save it for you. And there's a really great workflow when it comes to drafts that go into a shortcut and eventually go into Notion is another program we're going to talk about because you get access to Notion's API. And there's a whole workflow that you can set up just using drafts together. There's a lot of great information. All right, so now that we have our idea and we have it written down, we need to figure out how are we going to figure out what do we want to make first. So we have 30 ideas. What do we want to do? We want to do something that's in our wheelhouse, right? We want the idea that we're going to be working on to be something that is going to stretch us as developers, but it's not going to be overwhelming. It's going to be something that we can accomplish. We have to establish what are our knowns and our unknowns. So we have to understand what are the things that we do know, what are the things that we don't know that we're going to have to cross. We have to start thinking about these things so we know which thing we really want to do. Is this a portfolio piece? Is this something that's you're going to add to maybe help you get hired? Is this just a straight business? Like, is this something that can become eventually a company? Is this just something for fun? I think at the end of the day, it's really important to keep in mind that what you're doing, that you're, I don't know, I really enjoy app developing. And so I look at it as a lot of fun to dive into something. And so having that spark of creativity and just doing something out of the interest of doing it. Another thing to keep in mind is what is your timeline? How long are you going to be thinking about this? How long are you going to be working on this? You can reestablish this as it goes, but keeping these things in mind, I think, is really important so that you're kind of sticking to something, you have some sort of standard, but this can always be revised as well because you're going to run into things that you just have no idea that you knew. A huge disclaimer, the process can take months. Make sure you like the idea, all right? I think this is maybe the most important thing because something that I found when I first started developing was people would come to you with ideas when they found out you were a developer. And you would get these ideas that you're like, oh, that is an interesting idea, but I don't know. And then you start working through it. And then you're like, I don't have any attachment to this. I have nothing here. It's just somebody's idea that I'm working on. So when you're choosing something to work on, make sure that it's something that you really, really want to do. And I think I've kind of made it a point now to not work with other people's ideas, at least for my personal projects. I want them to be something that I've come up with, something that I'm interested in, because it feels like I've unlocked a new thing. Because once you start doing it, start getting into the rhythm, you really start to find a way forward. So after we have our ideas established, this is where our iteration comes in, our refining process. All right. To me, ideas are worth nothing unless executed. They are just a multiplier. Execution is worth millions. So this is where we really get into our, this is where the rubber hits the road, kind of. So sorting through ideas. So what we're really doing in this iteration stage is we're taking abstract ideas and we're actually making them concrete. So we're going out and reaching out into the ether. And this thing that we have thought of, we actually have to put it in a device in someone's hand. And so I think this is where we start to really hone in on what we want features and things to be. And this is going to be our first pivot points with many to come. So we're going to have to think through ideas, or think through the implementation of these ideas that we really want to make, so the features that we're going to be adding in. We're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions through the entire process. And so this iteration part is really honing in and really focusing in on the features, the set that makes up the idea overall. And I think this is a really good time to remember, because this may be months after. But remember that you're starting from an inspiration of some sort, where you saw something. Try to remember these things, because that will help you give context and take you back to that moment where you originally thought of the idea itself. All right, so this is an app that I'm currently working on. This is where I took my original inspiration from. And so you'll see in the iteration that you kind of start with work that's already been done. So this is from another app that I really enjoy called Letterboxd. It's kind of like a social IMDb. It's basically the easiest way to put it. So I kind of took inspiration on the first version of a screen. It's like, okay, this is all the information I have access to onto the API that I'm using, but I can make it work. I really like the layout of this. I kind of like how it looks. And I think this is good enough to launch with. I think somebody would, this would be okay to launch with. But then we get into like a version 2 of what something would look like. And now we're starting to get a lot more information, and something that is just, I think, is a way better design. And so you kind of had to start at one place, make it your own, and then iterate upon your own thing. So the apps. So how are we making this stuff? So Figma. If you're not using Figma yet, this is, I think everyone should be using it. It's free, as long as you're not working in a huge team. And it's available everywhere. So you can use it on iOS, web, Mac, Windows. And it's a really good testing ground, because you can, we'll kind of get into it, but you can really test out your UI UX in it. And then Keynote. So we're available on iOS and Mac. It's very quick and dirty, but you can do it. If you don't want to write a line of code, or if you don't want to fiddle with X, Y coordinates, if you don't want to do any of that, you just want to plug and play, I think Keynote, you can get actually a lot done. So getting into Figma, this is what a Figma screen looks like, and we'll kind of get into breaking down a little bit of what it is. So Figma, we're designing our UI UX, so how users are going to be interacting with it, where our buttons are going to be, what our views are going to look like, all these types of things. We can really prototype. This is the thing I think sets Figma above everything else. It's because you can start prototyping with it. You can get it in somebody's hand, and then they can swipe through stuff, and we'll kind of go through that. And you can see how people react to it. You can share it with people. You can send them links and say, okay, hey, can you look at this? Can you launch this? How do you like these buttons? How do you like how these things interact? And then a really great thing about Figma is that they have these templates that are available to you. So you can make like your app icons in there. I've made my resume. There's a whole ton of features that are just in this one design application. But just like a sketch. It's really similar to that, but it's a free version of it, and you can make your app icons, all kinds of stuff. All right, so in our screen, you'll see in the top left that this is basically where where we make our views and we make our screens and everything like that. Then we have our screens that we have laid out. You'll see a view for each one here. Within that, then you have your actual views and how you set them up and what they look like. So you can see that the movie details, the one to the furthest right, has all kinds of information. And then we get into like our X, Y coordinate stuff, what we want our views, how big they need to be, all this kind of stuff. Our color scheme. And this next part, this is my favorite part of Figma. And I think that this is why you should be using this tool alongside. So what we do is we're able to look at our button, and then we're able to, on tap, we have a bunch of different options that we could do. We can navigate to, and then we want to go ahead and navigate to our schedule, because we're going to be scheduling a movie. We have different ways to do that. Different ways for the view to appear. And then when we launch into our view, we can see this is our list of future movies. And then we click on a cell. And then we're able to see, okay, that's the movie that I want to see later. You can add it to your schedule. And boom, we'll see it added to the schedule and what that view would look like once it's added to. All right, and so for Keynote, so this is something I think, I don't know, I found a random WWDC talk about this, and I don't think I'd ever use this, but I like that it exists so that anybody can approach it. It's dead simple. So we have, it's a really quick and simple UI, simple UX testing. You basically use the app interactions as a slideshow. So somebody tapping on a button would advance a slide. And I included the actual talk. It is not on WWDC's website, by the way. It's not in there. First, who knows why? It just doesn't exist. So it lives on YouTube now. Okay. And so this is what they kind of go through. They show you the inspiration. So they started with their music app, and then they're making a toast app. And so this is what the toast app, this is, yeah, the toast. And they kind of show you how they steal from each other to make that new layout design. And so you're able to make a list view, you're able to make a collection view, you're able to make maps. You can do all of this stuff within Keynote itself. It's really, really nice. So you can get kind of a hybrid of a collection view. All right, so now that we have our idea and we've iterated, we kind of thought through, okay, these are the things that we want to include, these are the things we want to leave out. Now we need to actually implement those. This is where the really heavy thinking comes in. So the execution of all plans. So most leaders would agree that they'd be better off having an average strategy with a superb execution than a superb strategy with a poor execution. So the apps. So we get into Notion. This is an app I'm still learning, and there seems to be a lot of depth with what you're able to actually do. You're really able to organize chaos because when working through stuff, it can be, at least for me, it is quite a storm in your brain of like, where do I start? How do I do this? I want this to be done. I want that to be done. And so it can really help take your brain's processing and kind of like just spit that out into a UI, which is really nice. And the one that I've used previously, which is Trello. I really enjoy Trello, but I think Notion just has just more to it than Notion has more to it than Trello. So Notion. So this is just our post idea planning. We're kind of setting out. We're looking at task lists. And you're kind of setting up these tickets for yourself. And from this, you're basically creating your roadmap of starting from nothing, and then eventually all of these ideas are going to be completed, and it's going to be a fully featured working app. You can use it for project management, which is really nice, so you can assign things to people. If you're working in a team environment, let's say that you need certain UI things done, certain UI design need to be done so that you can implement it in your app. And you can share this with people. It's really, really great stuff. And it integrates with drafts. So the way that you can set it up is so that basically drafts works with the Notion API, and you can type out your drafts in a certain way so that when you import it into Notion, it'll just have all your tasks and everything set up. It's really interesting. This is kind of what the layout looks like. So you can see that there are different stages of where the app is in the process and different features and who they're assigned to, what the timeline looks like, these types of things. And this is part of like a templated system that you just have access to in their whole ecosystem. It's really, really cool. Then we have Trello. This is what I've used the most. These are like projects that I've worked on in the past and kind of our layout. And when you get into one of these, this is kind of what you're looking at. You're looking at basically the way that they would structure the sticky note system. So it's kind of like that, but it just doesn't have everything that I'm looking for. I think Notion has it beat out. But I think if you look at Notion and it looks like too much, I think this is a good place to start. So you're setting your roadmap. So you're setting your MVP. So MVP, if you're not familiar with it, is minimum viable product. This is, what is the minimum threshold that I need to meet so that I can ship an item, so I can ship a product. This is how you need to really think about app development, and especially in the early times of when you're developing something and sending it out. The thing that I've been told is that you should be embarrassed by your 1.0. If you're not embarrassed by your 1.0, you're probably shipped too late. So know that it's okay to, it's not to be happy with everything, and exactly everything is thought through and in place. Because you're going to get feedback, and you want to be able to integrate that feedback. So working through the tasks you need to complete to reach your MVP. That's the point of setting these roadmaps, right? So we have the end goal of all these things. Now we can start working through these. You're going to find that these task categories are really going to help you out. So you have a feature branch, and then you have like what you're working on currently. Okay, now that I've worked on it, I found these bugs in it, so now I need to debug it. Once it's debugged, I can complete it. And then there are going to be things that you find that are not part of your MVP. And so these can be part of a future release. So you just put them into a future thing. And then you're going to come across ideas, features where you're just, this doesn't make any sense anymore. I don't know why would I include this. And you can just scrap it. And so this is how you kind of organize your roadmap so that you know, okay, now I can launch. I'm good to go. One thing I think is very, very important is ensuring that you're giving yourself extra time to learn new skills in this process. I think that is a great part of developing, is you get to learn all these new things and integrate just these things you're not familiar with to be able to give you a larger feature set to offer when you're looking at companies and this type of thing. And then also budgeting for boilerplate work. So you're organizing, you're adjusting goals, adjusting features for launch, and just overall reworking your game plan. I know when I was first starting to work through ideas, I was not putting enough time towards this type of thing, because you just think, oh, I'll just get that done on this time, or I'll just get this done tomorrow. And it keeps kind of putting, but it all adds up at the end of the day. And I think it is really important to keep in mind that you are your boss during this process, that you are in charge of the whole thing, you are the captain, and that you're able to say, I don't want this anymore, and it just doesn't make sense to do it right now. And to know that you're the one making these decisions, and you're the one making these decisions, and your ultimately is going to be reflective upon you. And follow me at Tyler Perkins on Twitter. I'm looking to get more users. And that's all I got. All right. So any questions, I guess, is where we go next. Yeah.
I have a question. So you said earlier on in the presentation that most of your ideas will kind of stay in your notes kind of graveyard.
Yeah.
What happens to ideas that get past that but don't quite make it to a product?
So I think what I've found working through is that when I start putting my feature set together and really loading my Trello board up with features and things like that, if it's something that, if I find that I'm not able to really conceptualize how a feature or main component of an idea is really going to work, I think that's a really good way, or maybe you don't have all of the necessary tools in your toolbox just yet to execute in the way that you want to. I think that's a really good way to know, okay, maybe this idea needs to be put off. But I think even going through those steps and having all of that stuff for reference in the future is going to be good as well. So that you have those feature sets and you know what you were thinking at the time, and including in your notes, this is the feature that I think is going to be holding me back from launching this app. And sometimes it can just be pushed off into the future. But if it's part of a feature that it needs to launch with, that is part of the MVP, it is. I think that all of that work is good work, because it's showing that there is substance to the idea. But it's just as valuable to come back to it 6 months, a year, 2 years later, and to have a record of why you kind of put it off. So I think finding it in the part of the process is part of the process, I guess.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Tyler?
Yeah.
Hey, Tyler. Yeah, my question is, like, what's some of your favorite like sites to go to kind of get the juices going for ideas, like maybe like portfolio websites or something like that?
Yeah. So Dribbble has been like the go-to for, how long has that website been around? I feel like it's been like a decade or two at this point. But yeah, Dribbble is like, I like looking at UIs, and so just seeing that can really help, like, because it's really interesting about ideas is because something can just be sparked and you have no idea why you thought of it or where it came from, and it can just be looking at something. And so I think thinking of ideas is something I'm always thinking about. And so I think with that in like deep in the back of my brain, I think you just get inspired by living and trying to exist, and taking inspiration from people around you. The other one, I mean, they're not, and like I said, they don't always have to be like these revolutionary ideas. And there was a great GitHub repository that just has all these open source APIs. I'll find a link for it and I can let you know, but like, I'll include that with this stuff. But it just has all these open source APIs that you can just go into and say, oh, there's like one that was about beer. There's one about, there's a really cool Marvel one. And so just finding these things that you didn't even know you had access to is just being open to discovery. I think that is the fundamental of finding new ideas and being inspired. Just being open and just, I don't know, just thinking about the idea of ideas a lot.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Appreciate it.
Anybody else?
So how deep do you go into planning before you start building anything?
So the iteration, I mean, it can be really spread out over months. It really depends on what's really hitting you at that moment, because I think you're going to go through waves of you're excited about one thing and not excited about another thing. And I think I think a big part of is documenting, probably documentation and leaving documentation for your future self. And let's see, is there anything? Documentation for self, I think, is super important in the process, and leaving those notes in your roadmap, I think, is really super important as well. I feel like I did not answer your full question though. What was?
Yeah. So how deep do you go into planning? Like, when do you know it's time to start building?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so when you have, what is the easiest way to know when to start building? It's,
Because I know some people want to just jump into the code like as soon as possible, and I think you should spend more time.
yeah, definitely. I think you should hold back. I think once you have thought through all of the roadblocks you can think of in your app idea, I think that's when you probably should start building and start getting some of your views together and really working out the roadmap and what your feature set is going to look like. So once you can really set like what's the littlest thing that I need, I think that's a good place to start. And you're just going to naturally run into roadblocks, and you may get into development, and you're just going to run across something, and you're just not going to know how to overcome it at that point. That's okay. But I think, maybe I should include this, is using Git to leave yourself notes on the breadcrumb trail of the things that you've been developing and know why you've been developing, so you can think about them later. But I think essentially is just when you feel comfortable that you have a feature set that reaches an MVP, I think that's when you start developing. And just know it's okay to stop development on something when it's not inspired and you're not feeling it and you need to move on to something else. Because I burned myself out the first time I was really working through Swift and trying to understand it. And burnout it'll make you hate a lot of things in code. You will hate to look at your IDE. So managing burnout by remaining inspired, I think, is really important.